In the quiet suburbs of America, millions of elderly citizens go about their daily routines, unaware that thousands of miles away, criminal organizations are plotting to steal their life savings. These are not random street criminals or petty thieves. These are sophisticated operations run by networks of scammers who have turned fraud into a billion-dollar industry that spans across continents and targets the most vulnerable members of our society. The story we are about to tell involves real people who have dedicated their lives to fighting back against these criminals. Among them is Scammer Payback, also known as Pierogi, who has become a household name in the fight against international fraud. Working alongside him are other dedicated individuals like the Trilogy Media team, Carl Rock, Pleasant Green, Rosie, Matt from AnyDesk. These people have made it their mission to protect innocent Americans from falling victim to elaborate scams that are designed to steal everything they have worked for throughout their entire lives. But before we meet these heroes, we need to understand the enemy they are fighting against. The scammers they target are not working alone from their bedrooms or small apartments. They operate from large call centres, primarily located in Uttar Pradesh, India, where hundreds of criminals work in shifts around the clock. These operations are so sophisticated that they have customer service departments, training programs, management structures, and even human resources departments, just like legitimate businesses. They treat fraud as a career path and train their employees to become more effective at stealing money from innocent people. The victims of these scams are often elderly Americans who have worked their entire lives to build modest savings for their retirement. They're grandparents who want nothing more than to live peacefully and maybe help their children and grandchildren when needed. These are people who grew up in an era when a handshake meant something, when people were generally trustworthy, and when technology was simple and straightforward. They remember a time when customer service representatives were helpful and honest, when banks were local institutions run by people they knew personally, and when a phone call from someone claiming to help was usually legitimate. When an elderly person receives a call from someone claiming to be from Microsoft or their bank, they often trust that the caller is legitimate. The scammers know this and they exploit this trust ruthlessly. They have detailed scripts designed to create panic and urgency. They tell their victims that their computers have been hacked, that their bank accounts are at risk, or that their social security benefits will be suspended unless immediate action is taken. These scripts are carefully crafted to push emotional buttons and override logical thinking. The emotional manipulation used by these criminals is calculated and cruel. They prey on the fears that many elderly people have about technology and financial security. They use their victims' desire to do the right thing against them. When they tell someone that they need to help catch the hackers who are stealing their money, many victims feel that they are being helpful and responsible by cooperating. The scammers make their victims feel like they are part of the solution rather than the target of a crime. These criminals spend hours building relationships with their victims. They do not just make a quick sales pitch and hang up. They stay on the phone for entire afternoons, walking their victims through complicated procedures, answering questions, and providing what appears to be helpful technical support. They create an atmosphere of trust and cooperation that makes it very difficult for victims to recognize that they are being manipulated. One of the most disturbing aspects of these scams is how the criminals view their victims. They do not see them as real people with families and feelings. They see them as targets to be exploited, as sources of income, as nothing more than bank account numbers to be emptied. They have been known to laugh about the suffering they cause and to compete with each other to see who can steal the most money in a single day. Some call centers even have leaderboards showing which scammers have stolen the most money each month. The Federal Trade Commission reports that Americans lost over $5 billion to fraud in 2022 alone, with the majority of victims being over the age of 60. But these numbers only represent the cases that were reported. Many victims are too embarrassed to admit that they were scammed, so the actual losses are likely much higher. These are not just numbers on a report. Each statistic represents a real person who has been emotionally and financially devastated by these crimes. The aftermath of being scammed is often worse than just the financial loss. Victims frequently experience depression, anxiety, and a complete loss of trust in other people. They may withdraw from social activities and become isolated. They may stop using technology altogether, which can make it difficult for them to stay connected with family members and access important services. Some victims have reported feeling suicidal after losing their life savings to scammers. The ripple effects extend to family members as well. Adult children often feel guilty that they were not able to protect their parents from being scammed. They may blame themselves for not educating their parents about these crimes, or for not being more involved in their parents' financial affairs. Marriages can be strained when one spouse loses money to scammers without telling the other spouse what happened. This is where our heroes enter the story. Pierogi was working in cybersecurity when he first encountered these scammers. Instead of simply hanging up when they called him, he decided to waste their time and prevent them from calling other potential victims. What started as a personal mission to protect his own family members grew into a full-time operation dedicated to fighting back against these criminal networks. Pierogi realized that he could use his technical skills to turn the tables on the scammers. Instead of being their victim, he could become their nightmare. He learned to hack into their computer systems, access their cameras, and disrupt their operations. But more importantly, he learned to save potential victims by intercepting calls and educating people about these scams. He discovered that he could use the same remote access tools that scammers use against their victims to gain control of the scammers' computers instead. The technical aspects of what Pierogi and his team do are quite sophisticated. They use advanced software to track scammer phone numbers and identify which call centers they are calling from. They monitor scammer websites and social media accounts to gather intelligence about their operations. They analyze the malware and remote access tools used by criminals to understand how they work and how to defend against them. The People's Call Center 2023 was an event that brought together some of the most effective scam fighters from around the world. Pierogi organized this gathering to coordinate efforts and share techniques for combating international fraud. The event included members of the Trilogy Media team, who specialize in investigating and exposing online scammers, Carl Rock, who focuses on travel and tourism scams in India, Pleasant Green, who educates people about various types of fraud, Rosie, Matt from AnyDesk, and cybersecurity experts John Hammond and Zero Day, who had some secret tools that helped them take down scammers. The preparation for this event took months of planning and coordination. The participants had to ensure that they had the right equipment, software, and internet connections to monitor and disrupt scammer operations effectively. They developed strategies for dividing up responsibilities so that they could cover as many different types of scams as possible. They created communication channels that would allow them to share information quickly when they identified victims who needed immediate help. During the event, these scam fighters worked around the clock to intercept calls between scammers and potential victims. When they identified someone who was in the process of being scammed, they would contact that person directly to warn them about what was happening. In many cases, they were able to prevent people from losing their money. They also gathered intelligence about scammer operations that could be used to disrupt future criminal activities. The logistics of monitoring multiple scammer operations simultaneously required careful coordination. Team members would take shifts so that someone was always watching for new victims. They used multiple computer screens to track different scammer phone numbers and websites at the same time. They had backup plans in case their internet connections were disrupted or if scammers detected their monitoring activities. One of the most dramatic moments during the event involved a scammer who was operating from his home in Uttar Pradesh, India. This individual had been targeting elderly Americans for months. He would spend hours on the phone with each victim, building trust and gradually convincing them to send larger and larger amounts of money. The team had been tracking this particular scammer for several weeks before the event began. Pierogi and his team were able to hack into this scammer's computer system and gain access to his webcam. What they saw was disturbing and disgusting. The scammer was often partially clothed or completely naked while talking to his elderly victims. He had clean clothes available in his room, but chose to remain in this inappropriate state while conducting his criminal activities. This behavior demonstrated a complete lack of respect for the people he was victimizing and showed how little he thought of them as human beings. The team watched as this scammer guided his victims through the process of accessing their bank accounts. They saw him manipulate the victims' computer screens to create the illusion of fraudulent transactions. They heard him use emotional manipulation tactics to convince people to send him money through wire transfers and gift cards. In one case, they witnessed him attempt to steal $10,000 from a single victim, who was a retired teacher living on a fixed income. The scammer's techniques were sophisticated and well-rehearsed. He would gain remote access to his victims' computers and then manipulate what they could see on their screens. He would make it appear that their bank accounts had been compromised by hackers and that fraudulent transactions were taking place. He would then convince his victims that the only way to protect their money was to transfer it to a secure account that he controlled. But the team was not content to simply observe these crimes. They began to interfere with the scammer's operations in creative and effective ways. They would call his victims directly to warn them about the scam before they could send money. They would disrupt his computer system to prevent him from accessing victim information. They would even play audio messages through his computer speakers to let him know that he was being watched and that his crimes were being recorded. The scammer would spy on victims' computers, going through and finding their personal pictures, bank information, and computer passwords. This invasion of privacy added another layer of violation to the financial crimes he was committing. Victims were not just losing money, they were having their most private information stolen and potentially used against them in future crimes. The scammer would look through family photos, read personal emails, and access sensitive financial documents. The psychological warfare between the scam fighters and this criminal became intense and personal. The team would time their interventions to maximize the disruption to his criminal activities. They knew when he went to sleep and when he woke up because they could see him through his own webcam. They listened to his personal phone calls with his girlfriend and learned details about his personal life. They even observed his poor personal hygiene habits, including his nasty feet, which became a running joke among the team members. The scammer's daily routine became completely predictable to the monitoring team. They knew that he would start calling victims around 9 in the morning local time. They knew that he would take breaks for meals and would often eat while still talking to victims on the phone. They knew that he would continue working late into the evening, sometimes until midnight or later. This information allowed them to coordinate their disruption activities for maximum effect. During one particularly memorable incident, Pierogi called the scammer directly while his webcam was being broadcast live to thousands of viewers around the world. The scammer initially tried to maintain his professional persona, introducing himself politely and asking how he could help. But when he realized that his activities were being exposed in real time, he became visibly nervous and eventually hung up the phone. You could see the panic in his eyes as he realized that he was being watched. The conversation between Pierogi and the scammer was both fascinating and disturbing. Pierogi identified himself and asked the scammer what he was doing. The scammer tried to maintain his cover story, claiming that he was providing legitimate technical support services, but as Pierogi pressed him with more specific questions about his activities, the scammer became increasingly uncomfortable and defensive. The team then decided to escalate their psychological pressure on the criminal by sending him a live stream of his own activities. They wanted him to see that he was being watched and that his crimes were being broadcast to people around the world. They sent the video feed directly to his computer so that he could see himself committing crimes in real time. When the scammer saw his own image on his computer screen, along with footage of his criminal activities, he became so frightened that he immediately shut down his computer and never came back to scamming again. This victory represented more than just stopping one individual scammer. It demonstrated that these criminals are not untouchable and that they can be held accountable for their actions. It showed that when dedicated people work together and use technology creatively, they can make a real difference in protecting innocent victims from these sophisticated fraud schemes. The psychological impact on the scammer was so severe that he abandoned his criminal career entirely. The work done by Pierogi and his team during the People's Call Center event saved many people from financial ruin. They intercepted calls to potential victims and explained how the scams work. They provided education about red flags that people should watch for. They demonstrated that anyone asking for payment through gift cards or wire transfers is almost certainly a scammer. They showed people how to recognize when their computers are being accessed remotely without authorization. One of the victims they helped was an elderly woman named Diane who was in the middle of being scammed when the team contacted her. Diane had been told by scammers claiming to be from Microsoft that her computer was infected and that she needed to pay for technical support services. The scammers had convinced her that hackers were trying to steal her personal information and that she needed to act immediately to protect herself. When they reached Diane, she was confused and worried. She had been talking to someone who claimed to be from Microsoft tech support for over an hour, and they had been walking her through various procedures on her computer. The scammers had gained remote access to her computer and were showing her what appeared to be evidence of malicious activity. They had convinced her that she needed to pay the money to remove the supposed threats. The scam fighters explained to Diane that those were not Microsoft employees but were actually scammers and impersonators who were pretending to be from Microsoft. They told her that Microsoft does not contact customers this way and does not ask for payment to remove viruses or provide technical support. They explained that legitimate technical support companies do not ask for payment through gift cards or wire transfers. Diane was grateful for the intervention, but also embarrassed that she had almost fallen for the scam. She said thank you for the help and asked what she should do next. The team advised her to disconnect her computer from the internet immediately and to run a full antivirus scan. They also suggested that she change all of her passwords and monitor her bank accounts carefully for any unauthorized activity. The team also intercepted calls related to utility scams where criminals claim that a person's electricity or gas service will be shut off unless immediate payment is made. These scams are particularly effective because they create a sense of urgency and fear. People worry about losing essential services, especially during extreme weather conditions, so they are more likely to act quickly without thinking through the situation carefully. When the scam fighters contacted victims of utility scams, they explained that the electric bill threats were not real and were just scams. They pointed out that the callers did not actually work for any electric company, and that legitimate utility companies do not demand immediate payment through gift cards or wire transfers. They explained that real utility companies send written notices before shutting off service and provide multiple opportunities for customers to resolve billing issues. The utility scammers often target people during times when they are most vulnerable, such as during heat waves when air conditioning is essential, or during winter months when heating is critical for survival. They know that people will panic at the thought of losing these essential services and will be more likely to act without thinking. The scammers often have some basic information about their victims, such as their addresses and possibly even their actual utility account numbers, which makes the scam seem more legitimate. During their operations, the scam fighters would sometimes directly confront the scammers themselves. These conversations provided valuable insights into the mindset and motivations of the criminals. In one recorded conversation, they called a scammer and asked him what he did for a living, whether he made videos, and what his YouTube channel was. The scammer became defensive and tried to turn the conversation around, asking the scam fighter what type of content he made and what his favourite position was. The scammer's response revealed how little he understood about the legitimate work that the scam fighters were doing. He seemed to think that everyone was involved in some kind of scam or fraudulent activity. This mindset is common among criminals who have convinced themselves that everyone is dishonest and that their victims deserve to be cheated because they are naive or greedy. In another confrontation, the scam fighters asked a scammer how he could sleep at night knowing that he was scamming elderly people. They pointed out that what he was doing was causing real harm to innocent people who had families just like he did. They told him that the things he was doing were making people commit suicide and that people were dying because of his actions. They asked him to consider the human cost of his crimes. The scammer's response was chilling and revealed the true nature of these criminals. He said he did not care. He did not care about the suffering he was causing or the lives he was destroying. He said he did not care if people committed suicide because of his actions. This level of callousness demonstrates that these are not desperate individuals who turn to crime out of necessity. They are people who have chosen to make a living by causing suffering to others and who have completely dehumanized their victims. This conversation was particularly disturbing because it showed how the scammers view their victims. They do not see them as real people with real feelings and real families. They see them as nothing more than sources of money to be exploited. The fact that their actions might cause someone to take their own life is completely irrelevant to them. They have removed all empathy and compassion from their thinking. The scam fighters also used humour and creativity to disrupt the criminals' operations and waste their time. In one case, they called a scammer pretending to be a potential victim named Mike Hawk, asking the scammer to confirm the spelling of the name. The scammer repeated the name back without realising the joke, demonstrating how focused they were on their scripts and how little attention they paid to the actual people they were talking to. These humorous interactions serve an important purpose beyond just entertainment. Every minute that a scammer spends talking to a scam fighter is a minute that they cannot spend talking to a real victim. By wasting the criminals' time with elaborate pranks and fake technical problems, the scam fighters are directly preventing them from stealing money from innocent people. Sometimes the scam fighters would pretend to be potential victims calling tech support numbers used by the scammers. They would waste the criminals' time with elaborate stories and fake technical problems. Preventing them from talking to real victims during that time, they would create fictional computer problems that required extensive troubleshooting, keeping the scammers busy for hours at a time. The impact of this education extends far beyond the individual people who were directly contacted during the event. Many of the scam fighters create content for social media and video sharing platforms that reaches millions of people around the world. They share real examples of how scams work. They demonstrate the techniques used by criminals, and they provide practical advice for avoiding becoming a victim. This educational content is particularly valuable because it shows people exactly what to expect when they are targeted by scammers. Instead of just being told to be careful about phone calls from strangers, people can see and hear real examples of how these criminals operate. They can learn to recognize the specific language and techniques used by scammers to manipulate their emotions and gain their trust. The technology used by these scam fighters has evolved significantly over the years. They use sophisticated software to track and monitor scammer operations. They employ social engineering techniques to gather intelligence about criminal networks. They coordinate with other investigators around the world to share information and resources. They have developed custom tools and software applications specifically designed for fighting scammers. But perhaps most importantly, they use their platforms to educate the public about how these scams work. They explain the warning signs that people should watch for. They demonstrate the techniques used by criminals to gain trust and manipulate emotions. They provide practical advice for what to do if someone believes they are being targeted by scammers. The success of these educational efforts can be measured in the number of people who report that they recognized a scam attempt because of information they learned from scam fighters. Every person who hangs up on a scammer instead of falling for their tricks represents a victory in this ongoing battle against international fraud. The emotional toll of this work on the scam fighters themselves should not be underestimated. They regularly witness the devastating impact of these crimes on innocent people. They see the techniques used by criminals to exploit the most vulnerable members of society. They deal with the frustration of knowing that for every scammer they stop, there are hundreds more continuing to target new victims. Despite these challenges, the scam fighters continue their work because they understand the importance of what they're doing. They know that their efforts make a real difference in people's lives. They receive messages from people who have been saved from losing money because of their interventions. They hear from family members who are grateful that their loved ones were protected from becoming victims. The collaboration between different scam fighting organizations has made their efforts more effective. By working together, they can share resources and coordinate their activities to maximize their impact. They can learn from each other's successes and failures. They can provide support to each other when dealing with the emotional challenges of this work. The People's Call Center event demonstrated the power of this collaborative approach. By bringing together experts with different skills and specialties, they were able to help more victims and disrupt more criminal operations than any of them could have accomplished working alone. The event also served as a training opportunity where experienced scam fighters could share their knowledge and techniques with newer members of the community. The impact of their work extends beyond just the immediate prevention of individual scams. By exposing the techniques used by criminals and educating the public about how these operations work, they are making it harder for scammers to find new victims. They are raising awareness about these crimes and encouraging people to be more cautious when they receive unsolicited phone calls or computer messages. The story of the scammer who was ultimately scared away from continuing his criminal activities illustrates the potential for this approach to create lasting change. When criminals realize that their activities are being monitored and exposed, some of them may choose to find legitimate ways to earn money instead of continuing to victimize innocent people. The work continues every day as new victims are targeted and new scams are developed. The criminals are constantly adapting their techniques to stay ahead of prevention efforts. They create new stories to tell their victims. They develop new ways to gain access to people's computers and bank accounts. They train their workers to be more convincing and manipulative. But the scam fighters are also constantly adapting their methods to stay ahead of the criminals. They develop new ways to detect and disrupt scammer operations. They create more effective educational content to help people recognize and avoid scams. They build stronger networks of collaboration to share information and resources. This ongoing battle between good and evil plays out every day in phone calls between scammers and potential victims around the world. On one side are criminals who have chosen to make their living by stealing from innocent people. On the other side are dedicated individuals who have chosen to use their skills and resources to protect those innocent people from harm. The work done by Pierogi, the Trilogy Media team, Carl Rock, Pleasant Green, Rosie, Matt from AnyDesk, John Hammond, Zero Day, and countless others represents hope for millions of potential victims. It shows that there are people who care enough to fight back against these criminals. It demonstrates that individual citizens can make a difference when they decide to take action against injustice. At the end of the People's Call Center event, Pierogi thanked everyone who participated, especially the team members who helped put the amazing event together. He emphasized that their fight to stop scammers and save victims had achieved victory, but that they would continue to fight on. He encouraged people to check out all the amazing scam fighters who had participated in the event and to stay on the lookout for future collaborations. The story we have told here is just one example of the thousands of interventions that happen every month. Each successful prevention represents a family that did not lose their life savings to criminals. Each scammer who is scared away from continuing their activities represents potentially hundreds of future victims who will be spared the emotional and financial trauma of being defrauded. The fight against international fraud continues, and it will require the ongoing efforts of dedicated people who are willing to use their skills and resources to protect innocent victims. It will require continued education of the public about how these scams work and what people can do to protect themselves. It will require continued innovation in the techniques used to detect and disrupt criminal operations. But most importantly, it will require people to care enough about their fellow human beings to take action when they see injustice being done. The scam fighters profiled in this story have shown that when people decide to make a difference, they can achieve remarkable results. They have saved countless victims from financial ruin, and they have made the world a little bit safer for everyone. The message is clear. These scams are real, they are happening every day, and they are causing real harm to real people. But there are also real heroes fighting back against these criminals, and their work is making a difference. By learning about how these scams work and supporting the people who are fighting against them, we can all play a part in protecting our most vulnerable citizens from those who would exploit them.